Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Eileen Munster with the NGA Show, and thank you so much for joining our exciting and informative webinar this afternoon. And before I introduce our presenters, I would like to go over the format and housekeeping items to keep in mind. All audience members are in listen-only mode, which means you are muted. We will be monitoring audience engagement on the dashboard and encourage you to participate by using the question pane. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and you will receive an email with a copy of the recording so that you may listen to and refer back to it at any time. This webinar, as well as others in our series, will also be made available on the NGA Show website later this week. And now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our presenters. From Fiserv, we have Liz Ford, Senior Vice President of Government Relations, Brad Goad, Vice President of Global Digital Commerce, and David Conroy, Senior Vice President of Large Corporate Sales. And Brad, Kim, David, thank you so much for your participating this afternoon. Very much looking forward to hearing your insights. And David, it's all yours. Take it away.
Hey, thanks, Eileen. Really appreciate it. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Again, this is Dave Conroy. I manage the grocery business at Fiserv. I'm also a proud board member of the National Grocers Association, and it's really a privilege to be here today. First, I'd like to thank Greg Ferrara, Aileen, the whole NGA team for hosting this session. Second, for everybody, all the participants, please accept our best for continued health and well-being during what has been a long, different time for everybody. But on behalf of Fiserv, we appreciate your partnership, your business, your collaboration, and we thank you for all that you do with us and for the grocery industry. Today's slide, you can see, talks about the topic of embracing disruption, and I think disruption definitively means really a break or interruption in what we all know or knew as normal course. So certainly that has been the case for all of us, and as it relates to grocery, a very applicable topic. In the next hour, we'd like to do a couple of things, and as it relates to disruption and impact to the grocery segment, how are we adapting to that, and how are we working with all of you collaboratively to deal with the change and impact of what's been certainly a disruptive time. So I want to get to the agenda. I think we want to accomplish three things. Liz, if you could move to the agenda, I'll go through it. First, we're going to share some very high-level observations of what we see relative to the marketplace and grocery overall. I'll do that. And then we will turn to Brad Goad. Aileen introduced him earlier. Here's our lead digital commerce head based in Atlanta. And Brad's really going to talk about how new solutions and formats are being deployed across this industry to really address what I think you've all seen as significant change in consumer behavior and consumer buying behavior in your businesses. And then third, our government relations lead at Fiserv is Kim Ford. Kim's joined us from Washington, D.C., and Kim is going to update you on all of Fiserv's initiatives, engagements, and advocacy work on issues and legislation that really impact the grocery business. I think it's noteworthy. A lot of you have probably heard from Kim before and know Kim, but she's worked very closely in concert with the NGA in the past. So welcome our panelists, and hopefully it'll be a fruitful discussion. I would encourage you to leverage the question input capability on this webinar. And at the end, I think Aileen is going to turn to a Q&A session. So hopefully we'll have a decent chunk of time at the end and try to address as many questions as we can. So Liz, you can go to the first slide. First and foremost, just want to quickly tell you what's happened to our firm. We just celebrated the first year of the anniversary of the merger of Fiserv and First Data. It's a merger that created a $14.5 billion fintech. Here's the quick and easy. It has a year into this, in spite of pandemic, et cetera, it has been better than it looked on paper. We've been able to really leverage a number of synergies, both on the cost side, but also on the business and revenue side associated with what was a very complementary merger. So the firm, for example, has generated about $1.6 billion in additional cash flow over the first 6 months of 2020, and that's now increasing into the second half. Most of you on this phone know us as a lead pole position player in the merchant acquiring business. We are also a very large player on the card issuing, bank issuing, private label issuing side of the card services business as a processor, as a servicer, as a insourcer. And we also, in this merger, put together a very, very prominent bill presentment, invoice payment, invoice receipt management, and bill payment agency platform that has a lot of relevance in grocery. In fact, some of the folks on the phone are really leveraging that to a degree now as bill payment agents for cash-centric customers in grocery, people who come in not just to buy their grocery, but they're paying utility bills and credit card bills and insurance bills and the like. So long story short, it's been an accretive scenario, and I think specifically for grocery, a very good thing. Want to touch on a few trends. Liz, you can move forward. The next couple of slides are really a subset of stuff that many of you have seen from us before. We have a very comprehensive quarterly spend trend report that comes out across vertical industries. But if you can see on the next slide, Liz, if you move one up, we're really, if you look at what's happened here, nothing that you don't already know here. But if you look at really what we're going to talk about today in terms of transformation, you'll see the movement and the transition, the tracking of the transition from in-store or card-present transactions to mobile or e-commerce formats. And this is across our footprint and across our vertical industry merchants. The company does north of 10% GDP in terms of payment processing. So again, this is a view that's comprehensive. But if you look at grocery as it relates to upward trend in e-commerce digital, you'll see 100%. You'll see retail up 80. I happen to manage travel and hotels as a segment as well. It's one of my other industries. And as you can imagine, between cruise lines and hotels and aviation, it has been a very, very difficult time. But this really illustrates what's happening in terms of the transition to digital. You can move forward, Liz. As it relates to grocery, food, beverage, here, you'll really see at the very beginning, in the between March and April timeframe, everything that you all experienced in terms of your inventory and your stores and your SKUs associated with a heavy, heavy spike in transaction and basket size at the same time. That has settled in. I mentioned this is a subset of a much broader report, and I think if any of you are interested in it, you can contact us on the back of this webinar, and we'd be happy to provide you more details around this, including where some of the spend is moved in between different vertical industries. Think, restaurant to grocery, prepared food, those kinds of things. So many different cuts that we can bring to you, but you can see basket size, ticket size has settled in now as we move into kind of latter half of 2020, but still a significant move from card present in store to digital or e-commerce. More importantly, and Liz, you can move forward one slide further before I turn it over to Brad. And I think we wanted to make sure we got through with a little bit of detail some meaningful use cases for you. But I'll give you a couple of high-level observations. The transformation or the deployment of new solutions and collaborative solutions with people like you in this space has been kind of in four broad areas. Number one, it's been adaptation to consumer experience. So we're seeing a high movement of the cycle that says either order online, pre-order, and pick up at an adjacency at the store or a curbside, enablement thereof, and a demand for that experience. Also associated with that, a notion of how do I go do my shopping and not have to interact in a a physical way. So the whole notion of touchless payments as an enablement of the shopping experience has been a very big directive from us, from our grocery clients. Secondly, acceleration of digital. We looked at in the trends, all segments, in the national grocers, the NGA membership, et cetera, trying to enable all segments of their consumers, including EBT recipients, to be able to transact in the digital environment. So we've been very busy on the enablement of EBT in a digital format, and also a very strong increase in leveraging lower cost tender types like ACH, direct debit to bank, associated with launch of new digital programs. So kind of some dual benefits to launching digital programs associated with tender types that have a lower cost of payment acceptance and maybe higher loyalty characteristics. Speaking of which, integration to points, rewards, loyalty programs that are either in place or being contemplated along with digital programs, very much a focal point. I mentioned 10% GDP. We have a lot of data around customer segmentation, customer behavior, how customers respond to campaigns, to other criteria and factors in your business. So we've been trying to leverage that to help clients determine strategically how to launch these kinds of programs. And then heavier lift, a lot of activity right now in areas like Scan and Go, the digitalization of the entire shopping experience within store or out of store, accompanied with payment in app, and then connected commerce, adjacencies, or new payment wallets like Alexa Pay. We've recently launched with Petroleum's to enable new commerce experience by bringing new capabilities and new payment types into the consumer experience. So I would tell you around those four areas, we've seen the biggest amount of activity. We're not going to go deep in every single one of these over the next few minutes, but I'm going to turn it over to Brad, and we're really going to talk about digital and digital acceleration and what's happening in the market in that front. So, Brad, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. And if you happen to see the screen, no, my name is not Liz Bustamante. I don't mean to insult her with my ugly mug, so please forgive me. So as Dave said, there's a lot going on in the grocery space. And as he's gone through that broad story and that broad transition, I want to stay focused on this slide for a moment, because this slide, if you look at it, there's a thread here, a theme that you see, and I want to call that out and talk about it. As we, the global digital commerce team within Fiserv, and everybody within Fiserv thinks about what the future is and what are we focused on. We are focused on not just payments, right? That's the obvious, the cost of payments, your payment structure, functionality, etc. But really, the new Fiserv is focused on what we are doing to facilitate the merchant's engagement with their customer, right? It's not just about, we processing a Visa or MasterCard. It's about how are we enabling the direct participation and communication between that consumer and that business. This is crucial. So when you look at these four buckets that Dave just laid out on this slide, redefining the customer experience, accelerating digital payments, yes, but it's the digital experience that we're talking about. Loyalty programs, so that you know more about your customers. And when you know more about your customers, you can do more to drive them into the store, drive them to your website. And then key to this whole transformation, this whole experience theme is omnichannel or omni-commerce, meaning you're able to engage your customer at whichever point they choose or is convenient for them to interact with you, be it on the mobile device, in their car, on the website, whatever, or in store, to be able to execute a transaction with you, a purchase, whether they want to do scan and go, curbside pickup, etc. These are the types of things that we're thinking about. How do you engage? What kind of data are you getting from those engagements? And how can we help you drive repeat engagement with your customer and build a stronger bond? Liz, could you go to the next slide, please? So as Dave's alluded to, and we all are aware, this year has been highly, highly unusual, right? It's really driven a lot of innovation, and it's driven thinking differently about how we're engaging our core business models, et cetera. And within the grocery industry, we have seen a tremendous surge for digital solutions. Being able to engage with your customer online in a mobile app, where in their car, etc. And you can see some statistics on this page that talk about consumer preferences now really starting to focus on digital engagement, even with their preferred grocer. And we expect digital commerce in the grocery sector to grow to as much as 300 billion plus just over the next few years. Tremendous growth. And we're already seeing around 30 billion. I think we've already kind of surpassed that amount by our estimation in the grocery sector this year in e-commerce transactions. So this is all on the back of the pandemic. There was already the digital transition occurring, but now the slope of the curve, the demand curve, is just gone up exponentially. People don't want to touch things in the store. In other words, they don't want to stick their card and then enter a key or touch something that's been touched by the previous 50 people that were in line. They're thinking about these things. They're becoming more prone to using their mobile device, either as a wallet function, it's your own proprietary wallet, Merchant X's application, or an Apple Pay or Google Pay or a Venmo, whatever it might be. So the pandemic has really supercharged that transition to digital and to mobile solutions, and the statistics are bearing it out. Liz, could you go to the next slide, please? So Dave talked about or mentioned some specific use cases that we are seeing lots of demand for. So contactless checkouts. If you think about methods of conveyance or authentication when you're checking out, such as using your mobile device, not just Apple Pay or Google Pay and doing an NFC wave over the terminal, but creating a QR code on your screen as a dynamic token and presenting that to the scanner, right? Incorporating these touchless methods of payment with the current point of sale so that you don't have infrastructure changes. We see a lot of adoption, a lot of demand for those types of solutions. And the second point that we want to make here with these contactless solutions is that we are focused on parity. So Dave mentioned the digital EBT program. I think most of you have probably heard about that at this point. We were supposed to still be in a pilot, but now it's like a full-on program. And our commitment, this is our passion project at Fiserv, is working with the USDA to make sure and do what we can to provide parity of payment method, no matter what the engagement channel is. If it's mobile device, it's in store, it's in the car, being able to execute a curbside pickup or do a scan and go type transaction. This is where we see a lot of the growth in customer engagement and payment processing in the grocery industry. Liz, could you go to the next slide, please? As I mentioned, the EBT program in particular has been a tremendous focus for us this year. And again, personal project, passion project of mine, because I've been involved with it since 2016. And I've worked with Kim on this on a number of different initiatives to expand the program. But at the beginning of the year, we were live in 2 states as of January. And now, as you can see on the screen, we're live in 45 states with another 2 going live by the end of the year. And then we expect the 4 remaining states to be live at some point by Q2 next year. There has been an explosion of demand. We've been doing everything in our power to meet it. And I think all things considered, we've done a great job. It's available and there's certainly tremendous demand for it. Could you go to the next slide, please? So again, coming back to touchless payments, with a number of grocers, we have been discussing solutions around scan and go, or being able to use a QR code at the point of sale. We see a lot of opportunity here to facilitate everything that I just talked about with Dave in terms of digital transformation. It's the focus on the consumer engagement. And when you're more easily able to deploy your own merchant branded app and basically turn it into a wallet with stored methods of payment and create a touchless manner in which you can use that wallet either online to do an online order or to do a scan and go type of use case in the store, it's a huge win, because not only are you satisfying the customer's desire to have a touchless payment, you're also collecting more and more information on your customers, and you're more tightly wound with your customer. You're able to drive promotions, know your customer, and get them back in the store. So there are all kinds of benefits to these solutions, and that's where we are. Thinking about delivery, thinking about order ahead, curbside, scan and go, and loyalty programs, etc. How are we driving those? Go to the next slide, please. So again, I want to kind of re-encapsulate payment types and things like touchless payments and how that all kind of wraps up into consolidated solutions. So we want to think about how we are employing these solutions in a smart way for our customers. And when we look at the ability to deliver non-card payments like an ACH payment, right? Saves you interchange, etc. You can more effectively do that with a mobile app. And when you incorporate that mobile app and a touchless payment capability in store, it's not only that you've learned more about your customer, but you're doing one of your achieving one of your primary objectives, which is lowering your cost of payment. So many benefits. And then you incorporate something like EBT Online. Right now, that's SNAP, right? The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for foodstuffs, but we are also in the process of rolling out EBT cash capabilities using the exact same setup with that PIN pad. So that just brings more parity to the EBT payment method with your card types. So parity on access and parity of method and meeting your consumers' needs or desires for having choice in payment method. Very easily achieved with mobile apps. Yes, and as we point out on this slide, tremendous growth this year in these types of solutions. We believe that there will probably be a slight regression back to pre-COVID behavior, but we are also firm believers that a lot of this behavior and a lot of this increased demand we've seen in 2020 is permanent changes in the way that we shop and the way that we engage with businesses. Liz, could you go to the next slide, please?
Hey, Brad, can you hang back 1 second, Liz, on that one, if you can?
Yep.
It's Dave Conner again. I referenced some of this, and Brad hit on most of this earlier. I think some of these initiatives or the customer demand that drives initiatives are also allowing you to think through some combinations of consumer segment and consumer payment types. And when we think about the traditional ways, over and above, credit cards and debit cards, and we think about gift, and we think about the, opportunity to link things like ACH debit as a reload capability for a ex-grocer virtual gift card within this kind of either mobile app or QR code environment, you start to create a top of wallet experience that has very good low cost payment characteristics, but also has strong linkages to rewards, loyalty, frequency of visit, and basket size. So I think as everybody's engaged in these discussions, and because the opportunities have become more prominent and in fact accelerated, all of those things I think kind of come together at a good time to consider when you're looking at these initiatives. And EBT, which Brad has been the architect of our capability, and what was, as he said, a pilot and now the rollout, has become central to ensuring that we enable that effectively in every digital environment that we might put you as a merchant into. So I think all of the digital characteristics and consumer behavior change, all of those also have opportunities for you to introduce scenarios like, frankly, a Starbucks has, where you're continuing in their app to reload a virtual gift card and get points and get rewards, and scenarios that have been very, very effective in the market. So those are the things that are linked together. Some of those things are driven by analytics that many of you have, either within your own four walls or you're working with other companies, and some of that we may be able to augment with what we know about your spend and about your consumers and about what they do when they're in your store and when they're not in your store. So it's as I say, an interesting time to bring a number of different things together. Sorry, Brett, I just wanted to add that.
No, absolutely, Dave. I mean, I can get on my soapbox or my stump, and I get so wound up because there's so much going on in the space. It's really difficult for me to be organized in my thoughts and really gel what's going on, because there's just so much. But what we're focused on, again, is kind of how are you engaging your customer, right? We're doing the basic blocking and tackling, looking at interchange optimization, cost of payment, authorization, fraud, doing all of that. That's a given. But really what we want to focus on are the higher value activities, which is how are you engaging with your customers? How are you getting to know that customer? How are we making it easier for you, the merchant, to accomplish those things? So we talk about things like you see on this slide, like our Commerce Hub concept. Fiserv is very rapidly moving to a one entry point integration, meaning that rather than having to do all these different integrations for different functions, you have one API set, and we're calling this our Commerce Hub on a go forward basis, where you can plug in and get to all of these services, right? We're trying to make it easier for you to do your business, to engage with your customer. And we want to do that smartly. And that'll segue me to the next slide, if you could please, Liz. So the grocery industry, and Dave, and obviously I'm talking to the experts, people who work in the vertical. But as I think about it as a product person, and what's going on in terms of the transition from largely a card present business to now have this overwhelming demand to be a digital business with a physical presence, we think about things as a maturity curve and break it down into three buckets. And part of the reason we want to do that is because we want that transition to be manageable. We want to properly prioritize, be smart about our capital outlays, our operational changes, and how we make incremental changes to our existing business processes to move along that maturity curve. So many of you might find yourself in different stages of this maturity curve, whether it's just now, we call it developing digital, really getting involved in accepting online payments and having your website. It might seem like that happened 20 years ago, but I know there's still a lot of businesses that only have rudimentary e-com presence. So being able to do the online ordering and the loyalty program, et cetera, obviously is foundational. Now, kind of the bulk of the transition, are you digital ready? Are you able to accept payments? Are you now able to facilitate these new use cases that have just boomed in 2020, such as curbside pickup, and digital loyalty programs, a digital wallet, etc. And then we kind of get to the end of the curve where we talk about really being fully enabled for digital, having your own app, being able to integrate coupon functionality, and being able to coordinate with delivery, whether you're doing it in-house or you're using someone like an Instacart, right? How are we optimizing those channels from a capital standpoint, from an operational standpoint, and a margin standpoint? We're looking at all of these things, but we try to manage it in a smart way because we know how critical capital efficiency is to the grocery sector. So many things going on, so many really exciting things going on in the grocery industry from a payments, but I'll say a commerce viewpoint. And we're not doing it in a vacuum. We are working with you. We want your feedback. We need your help. Kim's going to talk about some of the initiatives that we are following from a policy and regulatory standpoint that actually can present more opportunities. I mentioned one of those, which was EBT cash, right? The ability to do EBT cash, or the ability to use EBT in a scan and go use case, right? Working with FNS and the USDA to enable those things. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it. And I will now hand it over to Kim.
Thank you so much, Brad. And hello, everyone. So I thought that we would just spend a few minutes as we, still want to leave some time for questions to connect the dots on some of the things that Dave and Brad just talked about with, again, kind of how policymakers are responding. And Liz, you can go to the next slide. So I just have a couple of items to cover here. So as you all know, obviously, I think when we started out the year, a lot of folks had in mind a fairly different policy agenda, and then COVID brought everything to a screeching halt, around the state legislatures as well as in Washington, D.C. And you have, as you all know, a fantastic and highly capable government relations team there at NGA. So I know that they've been keeping you informed, but just wanted to, again, kind of share Fiserv's perspective on some of these items. And then also give a little bit of a look ahead to what we think might happen in 2021. So again, you heard Dave and Brad both talk about, contactless payments. We've obviously all seen a pretty hefty increase in the use of contactless. And what we saw, and interestingly in DC and then in the state of Georgia, funny enough, is, that obviously policymakers are paying attention to this trend as well. In Congress, we saw a piece of legislation introduced in the House Financial Services Committee that would have prohibited signatures from being asked for or required for debit and credit card transactions. The bill didn't go anywhere, but again, an example of how policymakers are paying attention to what's actually happening in the market. And then in Georgia, we had what was, it kind of surprised a lot of us with a fairly negative inclusion in one of the executive orders that came out right when, in early or mid-March, when COVID was really just starting to, take the country by storm. The governor signed an executive order that would have prohibited, PIN pads from being used in any retail location in Georgia. So not only did that present complications for EBT acceptance, but we thought that it would also have a big impact on routing ability. And so we worked with others, around the country actually to try to change that. And I think, when I look at, that Georgia piece was not a trend by any means. It was isolated or limited to Georgia. But it does, to me, those kinds of things when they happen remind us how, I really think as an industry, we've made the payment experience pretty frictionless, right? And easy. A consumer walks up, they, present their card and they walk away rather quickly. And I think policymakers obviously have that same experience, and they don't realize when they put something out like, hey, don't use a pen pad, that there are thousands of companies behind the scenes that are really possibly negatively impacted by that. So, we could see a couple more of those types of things in 2021. I certainly don't think we'll see that at the federal level, but we could see a couple of states pop up here and there with those types of executive order type of provisions. Moving over to the right on prohibition of cashless. So this is something that again started pre-COVID, and it's got its proponents and opponents. So you all know electronic payments, have been increasingly popular year over year. We've seen cash steadily decline, and in some cases, look, we know how it is when we fly. Certainly at certain sports venues, cash is prohibited. And so in a couple of metropolitan areas, as well as a few states, we saw policymakers respond and say, we don't actually want merchants to not accept cash. We think that that could pose problems for certain segments of the demographic in that particular municipality or state. So I think, where we land on that, that's not an issue that Fiserv or historically First Data has really gotten involved in. The position that we take there is we think that it should absolutely be up to the merchant to decide what they want to do. So if a merchant, or grocer has a certain, demographic and cash is just not used, we're not going to stand in the way of, that decision to prohibit cash or not. And in fact, we want to enable you to have whatever choice, you want to be able to work with your customers as best as possible. Brad alluded to that as well. But I do think we'll see that probably pop up a little bit next year as well. Moving on to the online SNAP and TANF, as Brad said, so, tremendous activity in this space. I'm glad that we had gotten through a lot of the mechanics and logistics of the pilot that really, that process with Food and Nutrition Services, as you all know, started in April 2019 to expand SNAP online. And thank goodness, because, now obviously with COVID, really increasing that demand, the industry was largely ready. I think what we're working on now, and Molly at NGA has been super helpful. We've got a little coalition of folks that have been working on this, is how can we get FNS to speed up the process of approving merchants? So you saw on Brad's list, right? Tons of states now are able to accept online SNAP, but we really need to see, the merchant side come along. And I think that's just a function of FNS wanting to be very, very careful and ensure the integrity of the FNS number that they provide. But we are going to continue to work with them to try to figure out how we can speed some of that process up. And then, as Brad mentioned as well, we definitely see an opportunity for TANF, which, has far fewer restrictions in terms of the purchases than SNAP. That's another area that we think is poised for growth in the states. And we've definitely been hearing some interest from the states to say, how can I allow retailers in my state to accept this? So I think more to come, probably a lot of positive stories there in 2021. I will just note, though, I think, one thing that I could see coming up from a policy standpoint on this issue of online TANF in particular is, we've all seen the headlines, again, during COVID and after the CARES Act was passed in March and the extra unemployment benefits that were offered, how a bunch of the states have really struggled with the fraud that's been associated with those unemployment, benefits. And so again, because TANF has fewer restrictions, that is an area that we'll be watching as, how are we making sure as an industry that fraud doesn't increase now with, a greater acceptance by a bigger variety of retailers for those TANF cards. So moving over to debit routing, always an interesting issue. And again, obviously, Fiserv has a healthy perspective on this, a multi-dimensional perspective, I should say, because we do own 2 debit networks. But this is an area that we've worked, I think, again, really well with Greg and others on the NGA team over the years about, making sure that you all have your, federally given rights to route transactions where you want to preserved. And it feels like there have been some efforts to encroach upon those rights in recent years. So I think many of you all know that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, back in November 2019, announced that they had opened an investigation specifically on Visa and MasterCard, looking into whether routing rights were being infringed upon, specifically for in-app transactions or mobile wallet transactions. So it's 2 areas that the FTC announced that they were going to be looking into. And that investigation is still open. I think it probably slowed down a little bit during COVID, just with all of the remote work shift and things like that. But it has not been terminated. It has not come to a conclusion yet. So I do think that the FTC continues to work on that. But again, I think the other piece about routing is, as we've seen that shift where you have more consumers transacting online than at the physical point of sale, we think it's really, really critical to make sure that merchants have their routing rights preserved. And back a couple months ago, Senator Durbin started looking at this issue, obviously a longstanding ally of the merchant community. And he and Representative Peter Welch of Vermont sent a letter to the Fed and said, look, as folks are transacting online, we have some concerns, Fed, that issuers are actually getting in the way of merchant routing rights because issuers have not been turning on pinless functionality with debit cards. So as you all know, unless there's an AccuLink, pin on glass solution being involved there, if a transaction moves to online, there's not really a good way for somebody to enter their PIN. And so that means that you'd be limited in the networks that you could choose for routing of that transaction. That is, of course, unless the issuer has turned on pinless routing for that particular debit card that the consumer is trying to use on your website. So again, Senator Durbin and Representative Welch have asked the Fed to look into this practice by issuers. And I suspect that the Fed is probably talking quite a bit to the Federal Trade Commission about how to address both of these issues. And I think that we may see some more activity on that in 2021. I do think as we think about how that might be resolved, again, not sure where the FTC may land on that, but you all know from the EMV experience that the Fed has been paying attention to that. Back when the EMV screens were rolled out in November of 2015, some of you all saw in your store, US debit or Visa debit or US debit or MasterCard debit. The Fed ended up getting involved in that, and they wrote a frequently asked question to say those screens are violative of merchant routing rights and should not be used. So I think that we could see some kind of FAQ response again by the Fed on this pinless and routing issue. They've been rather reluctant, I think, to weigh in very proactively on Durbin issues over the past, but this is one that I definitely think will stay on their radar. There are a lot of merchants and other trade associations that are working on this, so more to come on that. So I think just to round out the discussion as we think about, post-election and certainly any economic stimulus measures that might take place, I think that we've got a lot that could change in Washington after November, or there could be a lot that doesn't change. One thing that we're looking at is if there's not an immediate winner after the November election, that it may take a little while in DC for Congress to get started on a legislative agenda in 2021. Certainly if there are recounts or lawsuits that are filed, that will delay, new staff that could be brought in either by an existing Trump administration or by a new Biden administration. But I do think that one of the first orders of business after the election will be to take another run at a CARES or COVID type of relief package. We know that Congress does agree, or the Republicans and Democrats do agree on a couple of areas, including additional PPP funding, some more stimulus checks, money for various segments like airlines, additional unemployment assistance. So, there are some areas where I do think that the two sides will come together, especially once the pressure of the election is off the table. So we could probably see that come together, I think, in maybe end of November, early December. If there is a Biden administration, and I think that we'll probably, come back to you all after the election and maybe talk a little more substantively about some of this. But I do think that, we'll see, as far as the payment sector is concerned, there's been an interest by some to look at this idea of having consumer accounts at the Fed. And, that could involve having a mobile wallet or a debit card associated with that. So, that's something we're taking a look at. That would certainly be something that you all would be affected by if there's now a new mobile wallet or debit card on the scene that is essentially housed at the Fed. I do think privacy is something that will take, another kind of front and center look. And as Brad talked about, things like the connected commerce and omnichannel, we're always thinking about how privacy measures may impact some of the use of data. We know that there is rich data in some of these transaction sets, but I think we always just have to be careful about, consent regimes and making sure that there's a lot of transparency around how consumer information is being captured and being used with others. I do think there's going to continue to be a push around financial inclusion and what we as a payments industry are doing to make sure that folks aren't left out of, the traditional financial services sector, for reasons out of their control. I think there will continue to be some antitrust kinds of inquiries, or, in the technology, big tech kind of environment, and fintech. And then I do think that for the banking regulators will also probably get a lot more active if there is a Biden administration. The Trump administration has really been pushing for a deregulatory type of posture and agenda, and I think that we'll see a reversal of that under a Biden and Harris administration. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour of what we see, coming down the pike, what we've been working on a little bit this year. Again, COVID threw a big monkey wrench in a lot of our plans, but there will be, I do think that 2021 is going to be increasingly active on a number of these and other types of issues. So Liz, I guess, am I turning it back to you or Dave, maybe, to wrap up?
I can take it. I can take it, Kim. And again, thanks for joining. I think very insightful and timely and topical in every way, shape, or form. And I think for the participants on, and certainly the NGA team knows this, and any of the retailer participants on, as you can hear, Kim and the entire government relations team are very engaged. They're also very accessible. So our team, again, is working in close concert with the NGA government relations team. But if you would like to discuss any of these issues more deeply, or have a one-off session on any of the topics that Kim brought up, we're happy to arrange that. I'd go back. I also wanted to, in terms of the stuff that Brad went through, I just call your attention to that last slide. I think was one of my favorite slides that you've done, Brad, because it really talks about what he describes as the digital commerce curve and helping to assess where you are. And I can tell you that at the outset of the pandemic, we were so active just getting retailers an ability to order, or have their consumers order online and come in at curbside or come in at adjacency and be able to take any tender type, including EBT payment, for either a curbside pickup or for a store employee to get an order online and go deliver it and take payment for people who are, particularly for people who are homebound, et cetera. So that, for some of our retail clients, that's where it started. But I think that's a good slide from an assessment standpoint to think about where you are and where you want to go. So with that, Aileen, I think we've got some time for questions, and happy to open it up if you've got some in queue.
Great, thank you. And yes, to the attendees, please do use the question pane for your questions. And I do have a couple so far. So the first to Kim, if a retailer is interested in getting into Snap Online, what's the first step? What should they do?
So there is a set of criteria and I would even say like a guidebook or a playbook that FNS has put out on its website. And so that would probably be the first suggestion I would make is take a look at the specs and I think significant writing that are out there. It's actually fairly easy to read. It is somewhat technical, but there are some I think certifications and such that need to be made before you can really get in the queue. And then Brad, do you want to speak to, is there a little bit more specific items that
Yeah,
you'd want to call
well,
out?
so I'll talk about the actual steps taken. So as Kim says, they have the requirements document that's on their website. And please don't be alarmed by the date. I think the date was expired earlier this year, but there's nothing's changed about the requirements for the program. But the steps to be taken are, yes, you go through the list of requirements, as she said, and then you submit a letter of intent to FNS. And within that letter of intent, you attest to having met or meeting these requirements. And then they basically give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, ask you any clarifying questions that they may need. But essentially, you submit this letter of intent, you get back a preliminary approval to move ahead. That some of the main requirements are going to be the ability to have, well, demonstration of having a technology provider that can provide an approved PIN pad technology, which for now is us, and having an e-com provider that can facilitate and meet all the requirements. And then once you've done that, and you've done your integration and have the PIN pad, you schedule a review with the FNS team. They look at your solution, and then you schedule a smoke test. And they literally go through a set of use cases and make sure that you're doing this okay, that you're adjudicating the SKUs and whatnot. And all good, then you can go live. You'll have your FNS online number and you're good to go. But it's generally 30 to 60-day process to submit all that, wait for the turnaround, get scheduled, and be approved, not accounting for integration.
Brad and Liz, it's Dave. I think too, we may have hit on a little of this in a prior webinar too, but please reach out. I think we've got some documentation and some what I would call a roadmap of things to be done, checklist, et cetera, and we can certainly get that in your hands along with the suggestion to get on the FNS site. But I think we've got some collateral that could be helpful. So. Yes. Email Liz Bustamante or Dave Conroy afterward, and we'll make sure we have all that contact information available, Aileen, through you guys.
Great, thank you. And another question, Brad, you mentioned Apple Pay and Google Pay. How common are you seeing these in the grocery industry, and how quickly do you expect it to ramp up over the next couple of months?
Well, as with all things mobile this year, we've seen a surge in demand. I think the greater demand, while we've certainly seen an increase in Apple Pay and Google Pay, we are seeing demand for Venmo acceptance, which we're going to be happy to talk about in the coming few months. That's another exciting development. And engagement with proprietary branded applications. So you think about a merchant's actual mobile application and enabling that mobile application for commerce. We're actually seeing, I think, even more growth in terms of the grocery sector with merchant branded wallets. And I'll use the term in air quotes, but I think that's where we're really seeing the demand, which is a good thing because then you're getting all of your customer data and all the other benefits.
I would just add, this is Dave Conroy, just add too, I happen to have petroleum as one of my other vertical industries. I can tell you that Apple Pay was one of the first wallets we enabled. It was driven on the back of a couple of large integrated petroleum companies who are launching mobile app pay at pump. It is within our menu of accessible wallets. I think to Brad's point, we've not seen a large flow of Apple Pay in-app transaction activity to date, but it's there. And as you look at a broad spectrum of payment enablement for your consumer base, whether it's that Samsung Pay, to Brad's point, your own proprietary wallet, retail private label, whatever the case may be, it's just another ability to get to a certain segment of your consumer. So it's there.
Okay, great. Thank you. And another question around AI stores. We heard an awful lot about Amazon Go last year, and we know that they're opening stores in cities across the country. What do you think about this for the grocery industry? Is this really going to take off for grocery, or is it really just going to stay with Amazon?
Dave, I'll go ahead if you don't mind.
Yeah, you start. Go ahead, please.
I think what we're seeing is a more practical approach. The quote unquote AI approach that Amazon is experimenting with, I have little doubt that in coming years will look much more like the Asian stores that we see videos of here in the States, right? Because a lot of stores in Asia operate much like the Amazon experimental stores. What I think we're more likely to see, and what the kind of statistics are bearing out, and what we see in terms of our own work projects, what are we enabling for merchants, is more of the things that we pointed out here today, like scan and go, like taking a merchant's own proprietary app and me walking into a store and filling up my basket and either scanning those items while I'm filling up my basket, or they get scanned at the point of sale and I use my mobile app to authenticate a payment, but minimizing touches and creating greater efficiency at checkout. I think that's kind of the incremental step, as opposed to just walking in and having cameras and everything else, check out whatever I've got going on. I think the incremental step is utilizing the existing POS system and the existing e-com system and taking some baby steps towards that AI. More capital efficient, more easily deployable, a lot less risk involved at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brad, it's Dave. I just real quick, I would add to that. I think that, there's certainly an ROI involved here, and I think it's certainly a heavy lift from an IT infrastructure standpoint. I think there's an opportunity to maybe do it selectively around segmentation or market location, maybe store within store concept where there's a component of your format where you could, proof of concept or test this kind of thing. There are providers out there that we're in the middle of dialogue with to see how that's going to go. But I think to Brad's point, I think it will be selective, and I think it will be, very much a phased approach rather than widespread adoption.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we're coming up on the hour, but I do have one more question. So a quick response, if you don't mind. Does Fiserv have a breakdown by percentage of usage in grocery by the different payment types? Also, any timeline for the acceptance of digital currencies?
I can talk to the availability of breakout of payment types. It's Dave, and whoever has asked that question, if they please contact on the back of this, and we can arrange for a view of what's a pretty comprehensive operational dashboard capability that breaks out every tender type and by volume and by transaction volume a dollar. Brad, I'm going to let you take the digital wallet. You're smart.
I'll be quick and blunt. Cryptocurrency not likely to happen in 2021. However, what I believe you probably will see is the gradual adoption of a stable coin type of crypto in terms of monetary units being transacted in a wallet.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so we are at 2 o'clock Eastern, so right on the nose. So thank you all so much. Kim, Brad, and David, that was wonderful. Liz, thank you so much for organizing us. There was a lot of great content, a lot of very good insights. So I really appreciate your time and your willingness to share that with the NGA community. To our attendees,
Likewise, always, we appreciate all you guys do, and to the members in the group, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy days. Thank you so much.
thank you all.
Thank
And with that, this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much.